All good integrated development environments have debugging tools, and Android Studio is no exception. I'll demonstrate how to use common debugging tools like breakpoints and watches by creating a brand new Android Studio project that I'll name Breakpoints. I'll use the empty activity template and create the project. Now, to demonstrate some breakpoints, I'll add some lifecycle callback methods. I'll add the onStart event and the onPause event. In both cases, I just type the beginning of the method name and then press Enter or Return to autocomplete it. Then, to give me a place to put some breakpoints, I'll add some logcat output to each of these three events. I'll use the log_i live template, and that expands to a call to the log.i method, passing in a tag and a string. I don't have a tag constant available, so I'll move the cursor right after that, and then press Alt or Option and Enter or Return to use an intention action. And I'll create a constant field with that name. I'll give it a name matching the name of the class, main activity, and that will let me easily filter for my logcat messages in the logcat monitor. Now, I'll make a copy of this line, and I'll paste it in the other two lifecycle methods, and I'll change the string that I'm outputting to the names of the methods. Now, I'll add breakpoints. The easiest way is just to click in the area right next to the line numbers, and that adds the breakpoint icon, and I'll do that on all three lines. When you add breakpoints, they'll automatically show up in your Favorites window under the breakpoints list, and that lets you get to those parts of the code by double-clicking. So now I'm ready to exercise the breakpoints. To use breakpoints, you need to run the app in debug mode. You can do that by clicking the debug button on the toolbar, or by going to the menu and choosing Run Debug App. Then choose the device you want to run on, and click OK. I'm running on my emulator. When the app starts up on the device, it'll show a blank screen initially, and that's because it's been suspended before it has a chance to display any content. Then I'll go back to Android Studio, and I'll see the debug window has opened automatically. Within the debug window, you'll see windows for frames, variables, and watches. And there's also a console tab that lets you get back to your run information. That is, the commands that were being run on the command line to make all this happen. I'll now go to each breakpoint in turn, and you'll see this highlight bar to show where you are in the code. To keep on running, go to one of the buttons at the top of the debug window. There are buttons for Step Over, Step Into, Force Step Into, and Step Out, and associated keyboard shortcuts. I'll click the Step Over button, and that jumps to the next line, but then if I want to continue executing the code, I can click the Resume button on the left, and that will jump to the next breakpoint in the onStart method, and then I'll click Resume again, and now the application has started, and I see the activity's output. Now, if I click the Back button, that'll trigger the onPause method. On OS X, where I'm using two screens, I'm jumping back and forth between the two screens, and Android Studio is taking focus whenever a breakpoint is hit. To stop executing the application, click the Stop button on the left side of the debug window. That clears the debug session and closes down the app on the device. Here's another example of using a breakpoint. This time, I'll add a for loop within the onCreate method. I'll use a live template called for_i, and that adds the code for a classic for loop. I'll set the value that I'm comparing I to just to 3, so I'll do this loop 3 times. Then within the loop, I'll use the log_i template again, and I'll set the message to I equals, and then I'll append the value of I. I'll also set an additional breakpoint here. While you're in a breakpoint, you can evaluate variables. They'll show up here in the Watches window. You can add values to the Watches window by clicking the plus icon, or by right-clicking and saying New Watch. And then I could type in the name of the variable I want to look at, I. So now I'm ready to debug again. This time, in the Select Deployment Target dialog, I'll click Use Same Selection for future launches so I don't have to reselect the device. Then I'll wait a moment for my breakpoint to be hit. I get to the first breakpoint on the first call to log.i. Now notice that my watches have disappeared. If that happens to you, you can also select the variable in your code, then right-click and choose Add to Watches. And I see the message cannot find local variable I. Then I'll click the Step Over button, and that jumps to my for loop, and then I'll continue stepping over so I step into the loop, and I see the value of I is now 0. And then I'll click the Resume button a couple of times, and I see the value of I is incrementing in the Watches window each time I click. Then I'll once again click Step Over, and that'll take me out of the for loop, and once again I see cannot find local variable I because that variable scope was limited to the for loop. Then once again I'll stop debugging, and I'll make one more change. I'll right-click on the breakpoint in the area next to the line numbers, and now I have some options for how the breakpoint will behave. I'll set the condition to I greater than 1, and then I'll click Done, and I'll debug again. Once again, I hit the first breakpoint, and now I'll disable that breakpoint by right-clicking and deselecting Enabled, and then I'll click the Resume button, and now when I hit the next breakpoint, the value of I is 2. I've skipped that second breakpoint a couple of times until my condition took effect. So those are some ideas about how to use breakpoints and watches to debug your app. All of these features are a part of IntelliJ IDEA, the underlying IDE that Android Studio is based on, and they all work wonderfully when you're debugging Java code.